Okay, hey there everyone. So I want to talk about this Reince Priebus versus CNN and NBC fake scandal, as I like to put it. It's not totally fake. I mean, I think that there is something to the Republican critique of the mainstream media that they are biased towards Democrats. I think that that is pretty much accurate, although one small caveat. There, in a lot of people, there is an identification of Democrats with liberalism, and that's where I take strong disagreement with, because a lot of liberal ideas have basically been abandoned by the Democratic Party in very crucial areas. Just look at the Clinton administration, which is what's being talked about here. They passed NAFTA and GATT, which the unions despised. You know, they ended welfare as we know it, which liberals detested. Liberals were pro the national federal welfare program. He passed the toughest crime bill in history, which was praised by Republicans like Orrin Hatch. He, had Alan Greenspan as the head of the Federal Reserve. He had a Republican, William Cohen, as his Secretary of Defense. Dick Morris was his main advisor. I mean, on issue after issue, Clinton was hardly a liberal. Just like in a lot of cases, the Republicans are hardly conservative. They've been for big deficits and big government in the past. But that's sort of a propaganda in and of itself that the media engages in. Identifying Democrats with liberals and Republicans with conservative. That's not necessarily true. But I'll leave that bias aside. But dealing with this issue, the reason I call it a fake scandal is because the true scandal, the real scandal, is the collusion between the Republicans and the Democrats and the media. They're all colluding to exclude third-party voices. And if you look at polling data, over 50% of the American people want a third-party candidate, want to support a third party in this, within the political system. And a generic third party. They don't name it. They just say, would you like to see a third party? And the majority say yes, because they're sick and tired of the duopoly. But there's a collusion to maintain the duopoly, to exclude third party candidates. Take a look at the Federal Election Commission and take a look at the media. They always try to exclude third party candidates from entering the debates. They do Democrats versus Republican, and they never put a third party candidate unless it's some self-financed multimillionaire that somehow gets a cult following, like Ross Perot about 20 years ago, right? That might be the lone exception. But that's the great bias. I mean, take a look at the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Not necessarily, they were pretty nebulous, not exactly well-formulated, sort of spontaneous gathering of people who were angry with the system. At the peak of their popularity, you saw opinion data showing that about 30% of the people supported either one of those movements or sympathized with either one of those movements. So if you combine them, and assuming that there isn't much overlap, that's about 60% of the population. But yet those movements, in my opinion, were pretty much ostracized by the mainstream media for the same reason, because they weren't part of the two-party duopoly. So to me, that's the most pernicious bias that isn't talked about, because in my opinion, the atrophy and the decay of the American system is fundamentally because we have two parties that basically represent the same interests, and there isn't much difference between the two. I mean, the Romney versus Obama campaign, they were in a lot of ways mirror images of each other. In fact, Obamacare in a lot of ways was rebadged Romney care. I guess that was one of the big issues. And there isn't much difference between the two parties. If you take away maybe the social issues like gay rights or abortion, maybe there's a lot of difference there. But when it comes to political economy, military spending, how we treat other countries overseas, there isn't much difference between both parties. And people are starving for different viewpoints, and the media and the two political parties are colluding to exclude those voices. And I think that's to the detriment of a healthy democracy.